Yan HaEmet.
Amen.
Amen.
מי הראשון?
My mother was a very special person, and she created a blueprint for me, mapping out the way that one should live their life. I'm so grateful to her for giving me this gift. I think the phrase that best describes how she lived her life is in Pirkei Avos, Im lo achshav imatai. If not now, when? My mother was a doer, always setting goals and accomplishing them. My mother was so proud of what she and my father had accomplished in the shul. There are many families that are Shomrei Torah u'mitzvos, some here in Eretz Yisrael, due to my parents' influence, and it started with Shabbos and Yom Tov meals at their table. My mother would walk around the table serving the food and making sure that everyone took seconds. There was never just enough food, but always extra so that the guests would feel comfortable. They showed many of the teens in the shul what a Shabbos table looked like and encouraged their parents to send them to day school for a Jewish education. And now those teens are grandparents with Shabbos tables of their own. These generations of children are zchus that my mother carries with her to the Kisei HaKavod. My parents created something special in the shul, and that was the feeling of not just community, but family, which I took for granted growing up and did not realize how unusual this was until many years later. I would often see the women in shul coming to talk to my mother and sharing any difficulties that they were experiencing because they knew that my mother truly cared and always listened with a compassionate ear. That was one of the many lessons that I learned from observing my mother's actions. My mother, with the encouragement of her mother-in-law, went back to school and received her PhD. She went on to pursue a second career as a psychologist at the age of 40 for the next 40 years. It showed me that it's never too late to pursue your dreams. She also taught me the importance of finding an occupation that you enjoy and brings you fulfillment. Most importantly, all my mother's accomplishments, both as Rebbetzin Chavi and Dr. Lehrfield, did not distract from her love and devotion for her family as a mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. This was her pride and joy, and she of course excelled, as all Yiddish mamas, in the art of worrying about them and wanting only the best for them. My mother took her job running our household very seriously, and everything ran smoothly and seemingly effortlessly, although I'm sure it was with great effort and time on her part. Her work outside of the house did not detract from what she considered to be her most important obligation, her family. Another lesson in the blueprint she created. The importance of family carried over into her relationships with her parents, in-laws, beloved sisters, and sister-in-laws, as well as her nieces, nephews, and cousins. My mother taught me how to be a good daughter, daughter-in-law, sibling, and aunt. Next month would have been my parents' 70th anniversary. My parents were a perfect team. My mother was truly an Ezer Kenegdo, a perfect helpmate for my father in both their work for the Klal, the community, and in raising their family. To my dear father, I can't imagine how difficult it is to lose your best friend and Ish's Chayil of 70 years. There are so many beautiful memories that you and Mom created together. Please be assured that Yoni, David, and I will remain at your side. I want to publicly thank both of my brothers for all that they did for our mother and continue to do for our father every day. I truly appreciate it. I'm sure that my mother is now schmoozing with Riva, as well as her sisters, who she missed so much. Mom, you spent a significant part of your life taking care of me, and more importantly, implanting in me the skills and abilities to live independently. As is the way Hashem runs the world, the cycle of life changes, and it becomes the responsibility of a child to help take care of their parents. Mom, I truly did my best over the last few difficult months, but I ask for your forgiveness, your mechila if I didn't do enough or could have done more. I love you, and I want to express my akaras latov for all that you did for me. I will miss you so much, but please know that I carry the blueprint you created in my heart and will continue to use it to guide my life. May your neshama have an aliyah, and you should be a meletz yosher for your entire family.
So Binyamin, the oldest grandson, wasn't able to make it, so he sent a speech which I'm going to read. Yesterday, I traveled from New York to Chicago to be with my Saba during this difficult time. We shared some very special and painful moments. Very often, as we were talking about Savta, The conversation would suddenly end as Saba had said to himself, "I don't know where my home is." It took until the flight back home for Saba's words to finally hit me. This wasn't a question of confusion or geography of where he was or where he would be. A question of Chicago, Israel, the house, Buckingham. But rather, for Saba and for so many of us, Savta was home. Savta wasn't someone who just built a home. She was the home. In her presence, I felt safe, understood, and loved. She taught me that home isn't just a place, it's the people who make us feel whole. Saba and Savta's physical home was a reflection of who they were, warm, welcoming, and alive with love. Growing up, we would spend hours there for Shabbatot, sleepovers, a quick hello if we were in the neighborhood. Savta always mustered up presents and special gifts from hidden closets. Her kitchen, always filled with cookies in the cookie jar and sugar-free cereals in the cupboard that Savta would tell us to just add a teaspoon of sugar as needed. Who could forget Friday night dinners, often prepared months, if not years in advance from deep freeze? Homemade applesauce, brisket, and soup. It was delicious. The 1992 vintage was my favorite, and I think if you stop by, you might be able to get the last container or two. Savta's home was our second home, and it was a place that so many found joy and comfort. The inedible image that I have in my mind as I think of my beloved grandmother was Savta standing at the top of the landing, having just buzzed us in the house, standing there with her arms wide open, waiting for a hug. You couldn't pass without giving Savta a hug and a kiss. As the eldest grandson, I feel like I was lucky to have a very unique and special relationship with all of my grandparents, but in particular after my parents made Aliyah. You see, to travel back to Chicago to check in on my grandparents and give the report back to my parents on how everyone was doing. And for a time, I was traveling back and forth every few months during breaks from college, for Thanksgiving and winter break, to a long weekend to say hello. During those years, by traveling back so often, I felt like I was doing something for them. But as I reflect back now, I realize that it wasn't me who was helping and supporting them, but rather the other way around. Saba and Savta's home became my literal home over those years. During some of the hardest moments of my life, it was Savta who was there to talk things out and to offer guidance and advice, from show politics to life as a Rebbitzin to challenging relationships and more. Savta was always there and ready to talk. In February, when I visited in a moment of clarity, Savta turned to me and said, "You know, we really have been through a lot together." And I remember at that time, just as I do now, feeling an enormous sense of gratitude to have had Savta in my corner for nearly 40 years. Savta always wanted the best for us and always did whatever she could to provide it, from taking us to plays at the Playhouse or to classical music concerts at the Shul so that we might be a bit more cultured, to even making sure that we looked our best. When I took Orit to meet Saba and Savta, Savta insisted that she take Orit out to buy clothes and makeup. Savta would buy me suits and even once bought me a Shabbos coat because how could a chassan of hers not look his best? On Friday nights in our home, when I sing Eshes Chayil to Orit, I always pause and think back to how lucky I've been to have such incredible women in my life. My mother, my Savta, and Bubby. And today, as we pay our Kavod Acharon to Savta, the words of Eshes Chayil offer profound meaning and feel like a perfect description. For instance, Batach Ba'alev Ba'ala, or Batakam Bo'layla Vatiten Terf Leveita, or Pia Patcha B'chachma V'tar Chesed Al Leshona. She tended to the affairs of her household, raising her children and organizing her home. She was her husband's most trusted counselor and a successful person in her own right. She provided not only for her own family, but was mindful of the needs of the community. She worked long hours, but never complained, accepting what life brought with strength and dignity. But the poem's sentiments are summed up, I think, in the most moving tribute. Kamu Vanea V'Yashura. Her children rise up and call her blessed. There truly can be no more eloquent eulogy, no better summary of the life of my Savta than to say that each and every one of us consider ourselves blessed that she was our mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. Savta, I love you and miss you so much. I hope that I can continue to make you proud so that you and your legacy can continue to be a bracha for many years to come.
We are here today to say goodbye to my Savta. Over the years, I was lucky enough to occasionally come to visit, weekly, even at a young age. I would call before Shabbat, and Savta would ask me how my week had gone. I continued to call, even when we moved to Israel. This was a very special thing for me, and I always will remember it. I was so fortunate that A couple months ago, I was able to go with Yael and go visit Savta and even get her approval. My Saba and Savta made an extra effort to come to Israel to celebrate my bar mitzvah. She always tried to make me and other people in the room feel special. I only have one question. What did you do with the cookie jar and the cookies? I will miss you greatly, and I will always love you.
This one's for me. Okay. I feel incredibly fortunate and thankful that I had the privilege of spending so many years with Savta. At 37, I realized just how rare it is to have a special relationship like the one I had with her, to be able to grow up with a grandmother in your life for so long. Many people don't get that opportunity, and I will forever be grateful that I did. When I think of my Savta, the first things that come to mind are the Shabbos/Chagim sleepovers and meals, playing cards together, visiting her office, the weekly Good Shabbos calls, and of course, running around the house. We had so much fun in that house. I don't know why, but being with you made chores like bringing up massive containers of frozen soups from downstairs to upstairs somewhat fun. But more than all that, I think of the endless hours we spent together just talking. Savta was someone you could talk to about anything, at any time, and she would always listen and make you feel comfortable. When I think of all the times I didn't listen or misbehave or snuck cookies from the kitchen cookie jar, the only time you ever openly got upset at me was when I was 6 or 7, and I was having one of those incredible Shabbos sleepovers at Saba and Savta's, and I proudly walked up to the bimah to sit next to Saba, and after you repeatedly told me I'm not allowed to go up there if I have to pick my nose, I did it anyways. Now I understand, and you were right. Savta's house was our safe haven. No matter where I was in life or what was happening, I knew I could run to her house, and she would be there standing by the steps, ready to buzz me in, demand a hug, and protect me. Whether I needed a break from everything happening in our house or just some quiet, her door was always open. I felt like I had a second home in her house, and that was something that never wavered. I could always count on her to be there. One of the memories that stands out to me is when I was 16 and all my friends started to get cars. I really wanted one too, so who was I going to ask? Of course, I called Savta to help me figure out how to convince Abba and Ima to buy me a car. Somehow, I don't know how it happened, but the next week I got a car, and I have her to thank for it. We were so lucky. My siblings and I were fortunate to live so close to Saba and Savta. We had so much time with them, so much quality time, that I now realize was a gift I took for granted. One of the hardest days of my life was when we made Aliyah and left Chicago. It wasn't just because we were leaving friends or a place we loved, but because we were leaving our grandparents. No more dropping by for a spontaneous visit, no more long talks face-to-face. That was one of the hardest things. But despite the distance, whenever I came to the States, even for work, I always made sure to make a stop by Chicago, even if it was just for a few hours. Seeing all the grandparents became a must and a priority for me. I was so fortunate that my children got to meet you and experience even a fraction of the love and care that I had growing up. You took Lauren in as one of your own children, and I know Lauren felt like you were another grandmother for her. I remember on one of my trips, I told you I was going to go shopping for clothes at a store, and you forcefully telling me I need to shop at Carson's on a specific day because they have a senior citizen discount. So I waited for that day, and you dropped me off at Lincoln Town Center and told me to call you when I was done so you can come get me the discount. Always taking care of me, even in the smallest ways. One of the last times I visited, Savta wasn't feeling like herself, and she didn't recognize me right away. I kept saying, Savta, it's Yosef. And you kept repeating, oh, Yosef, he's such a good boy, such a sweet boy. He calls me before every Shabbos. Even though it was very challenging to see you like that, it meant the world to me to hear those words to know how you felt about me. Savta, I'm forever thankful for everything you've taught me, everything you've given me, and for every moment we shared. I'm so sorry for not spending more time with you, for not visiting more often, and for taking our time together for granted. But I hope you know how much everything meant to me, how deeply I loved you. May your memory be a blessing.
I think for me, part of what I'm speaking of or from is also Mkom in place of my mother. So it's a little bit touchy in that sense. Okay. So for me, Savta was really the ideal grandmother. Savta was homey, she was warm, and she was loving, and she had a focus on family. In terms of Savta's hominess that I felt, even though we lived in West Hempstead in New York, which is relatively far away from Chicago. We only saw Saba and Savta a few times a year, 2 or 3 times a year. I always felt comfortable, and we always felt comfortable going to Saba and Savta, and we always felt at home whenever we would see them, whether it was in West Hempstead, in Chicago, in Israel, in Muncie by Aunt Leora. We always felt at home with Savta. She was a presence of feeling at home. Especially near and dear to me were the special times of the Seder that we spent together at Aunt Leora's house with Saba and Savta. Savta, as everyone's saying, she was really the homemaker. She's a powerhouse behind everyone being there, making people feel at home and cooking up a storm for whenever we would be there. Savta was always either perching, on that stoop on top of the stairs, or she was in the kitchen cooking something. That was really just the staple of my image of Savta. And she was an amazing cook. She really had her famous meatloaf that I was scared of meatloaf for a long time, and then I ate it, then I really liked it because Savta made it. But the core of Savta's hominess was really her warmth, the warmth that she embodied and that she imbued. Whenever we would see Savta, she would always ask for a hug and a kiss. It was really the first thing. It was really, give me a hug, can I have a kiss? And it was a pleasure just to sit and be with Savta. When I was younger, it was exciting to go and visit family, visit Savta, visit Chicago. It was a trip. But when I was older, I learned to confide in Savta and to ask advice, dating advice, life advice, everything. She was, as Moshe said, I spoke to Moshe earlier, my cousin Moshe, she's really like a second mom, in a sense. Recently, when Savta's health declined, it was different, but it was still just a pleasure to sit and be in the presence of Savta and to be able to help out around the house and basically give back in any which way I could, to kind of give that love and pass it forward. And I tried as much as I could. I was Zocha since we moved to Israel, which was 10 years ago, to visit once or twice a year. Savta is very loving. I remember whenever we visit Saba and Savta always had some sort of tchotchke toy that you pull out of nowhere and you just give it to us. I still have them. I cherish them. I still have them well, actually, I don't know if I have them anymore, but back in West Hempstead, our house got destroyed, but so maybe I don't have them anymore. But on our birthdays, I know I have this. On our birthdays, Savta would always send us a birthday card with a check inside. And I'm very happy that a few years ago I decided, I think the last one that we got, decided not to cash the check. I still have the check, just to keep it as a memory. And I have the cards, I have the check. So she was very involved in our lives as much as she could be from afar. Savta I think Savta really expressed her love and her worrying. Savta worried a lot about everything and about everyone, everything about everyone's lives. And I think that's why Savta carried around this magical pocketbook that never ended, that she had basically everything in. So whenever he had any worries, Savta could pull it out of her pocketbook and give it to you. You need a sandwich? Here's a sandwich. That was Savta. In terms of family, Savta was focused and her priority was her family. She wore many hats in her lives as a Rebbitzin, as a mother, and as a psychologist, but most prevalent was her family. Savta wasn't just a Savta, she was a mother and she was a great-grandmother. And above all else, and behind the different various roles, she really focused on being the mother. And she raised a wonderful family. Look at all of us here, not celebrating, but coming together and really wishing off Savta to her final resting place. And we all love Savta. We all cherish the memories that we have. On our last trip that we had in June, Savta, like Yosef was saying, she didn't recognize me at first. I don't know if she recognized me even at last, but within the first couple minutes of the conversation that we had, Savta paused and she said, you must be family. She didn't identify me per se, but the vibe of the family, this innate connection that she had with her family, it was a language that was unspoken but recognized, nonetheless. And I thought that was very special. And it implies and it shows the core of Savta's being was really her family. So just a note about Savta and my mother's connection. My mother and Savta were very, very close. I don't remember a few days, maybe a day going by without my mother calling Savta, and they're kind of attached at the hip in that sense, that they would confide in each other. I don't really know what they talked about, but I know that Savta did confide with my mom and ask her about medical advice sometimes, maybe. But they were very, very, very close, and it was very hard for Savta once my mom passed away. And I think since then, Savta kind of, I think she kind of let go. And she's going to, Bezrat Hashem, reconvene with my mom and her sisters and her parents. And we wish Savta the best on your journey, your final journey. And we thank you, Savta, for all the gifts, physical, tangible, and non-tangible gifts of love that you gave us. Savta, thank you, love you, and mechila for any non-covetic things that I may have done or lack of kavod.
This is a very difficult time for us as we say goodbye to my wonderful mother, Chava Riva Bat Yehuda Leib, Chavi Lehrfield. She was born on September 29th, 1934, on the west side of Chicago to the Sklar family. They consisted of 4 sisters who were extremely close: Helen Davis, Gladys Naaman, and Shirley Nathan, Alehena Shalom. My mother was always in contact with them, and family affairs were always well attended, as the cousins were very close to each other. There was another sister, however, Edith, who died suddenly at the age of 15, 2 years before my mother was born. My cousin Dvorah, Bobo Ryan, told me the other day that my Aunt Edith, who I never was able to meet, her yortzeit is the same day as my mother's yortzeit, 26th of Cheshvan. It's a small world. My mother was multifaceted, and she had 4 important things that she held dear to her life: family, the shul where my father was a rav for 58 years, her house that she built in 1963, and her work. The family was the most important thing to my mother, and not just the extended family with the cousins, but especially her children and her grandchildren. She would always have snacks and toys for the children to play with whenever we came by, even for short periods of time. We were always welcome for Shabbatot and Chagim. I remember as a child playing in the back with my mother with a bottle cap and a rubber ball, trying to hit the cap to turn over in order to win, and also playing with puzzles and games. My mother was also most proud of all of her children's accomplishments and was supportive of all of our life decisions. We took family trips together, including the Wisconsin Dells. I remember going to the Smoky Mountains with my Uncle David and his children from Florida, among other places. I remember once going to the Lincoln Park Zoo, and we were about to eat lunch, and my mother turns around, sees a complete stranger, pulls out a sandwich, and gives it to him. I said, "What are we doing?" And she said, "This person was probably homeless. He had nothing to eat, so I had to give him something." And she did. Now, she was also known by some of the cousins, my cousin Yaakov, for instance, to be the aunt with the biggest and best hug. She gave the big squeeze. We tried to teach our children the same love that we received, and we had them call before Shabbat and Chagim to say hello, even when they had moved out of town. The second thing was my mother was known as the Rebbitzin of the shul. Her open sukkah was legendary, where she prepared her own chopped herring that was only available to us one time a year and then frozen for another day. As opposed to Sukkot at night, where snow and cold was often a factor, and gloves, heaters, and soup were the only way to go. My father was very involved in Kiruv, and my mother kept an open table for all that needed to come. Many young people in the neighborhood who were Chozrei B'Tshuvah would have nowhere to eat on Shabbat, including the Baal Koreh that came to read for the teen minyan. And they ate with us every single Shabbat, and for Pesach, Sidarim. That's when there were 2 Sidarim. In the meantime, to this day, friends of mine still remember fondly the good times they had when coming to eat my mother's food and sitting at the table to listen to a drasha from my father. The house was noted to be her most important legacy on how she built it, and she needed a big house So when family members would come, they would have a place to stay over. Our house was a stable household for 61 years, still there. Many times she stated that she was never leaving her house and she hoped to die there. Unfortunately, the prophecy came true this week. My mother also decided that being a Rebbitzin was not enough. So she went back to school to get her PhD in psychology from Northwestern University, and she had a very successful private practice. She kept a private office away from the house that even when she was essentially retired, she refused to give up, just in case a patient needed to be seen. Many people have come to me over the years and told me how they knew that my mother had helped either them or other friends of theirs over the years. Most importantly was the love and interaction between my parents. My parents met at Camp Mosheva while playing ping pong and were married for almost 70 years. 70 years would have been the first night of Hanukkah. My mother would always make sure that my father was dressed 100% appropriately and given a quick trim of the beard, check of his tie and suit before he went off Friday night to shul. In turn, after singing Eshet Chayil and giving us all brachot, no matter who was at the table, friends, relatives, strangers, my father would give my mother a kiss and wish her Shabbat Shalom. On all of our birthdays, my father would purchase flowers for my mother, thanking her for giving him his greatest gift, his children. When my father would write major speeches for the Amim Noraim, my mother would check every line and every word to make sure the pronunciation and the spelling was exact. I do not think that my mother ever knew that my dad never read the speeches. He always did it Baal Peh. He had an amazing memory, a 30-minute drasha, so he never really looked at the paper that she had fixed. But we never told her. I talked to my father tonight. I've been talking many nights. And I asked him, because he started sitting Shiva yesterday, and I asked him, is there anything that you want me to say? He said to me, number one, always know that I loved her. Know that I will miss her, and I don't know what I will do. The truth is that my mother died about 2 o'clock in the morning, our time, on Tuesday. At 1 o'clock in the morning, my father called, and he normally would call me, it would go to my cell phone. He happened to call the house, and he asked, and Debbie answered the phone, 1 in the morning, she'd be up, of course. And she answered, he said, I just want to make sure, is everybody okay? And Debbie said, we knew my mother was sick and having problems, but she was not going to be, we weren't going to tell him. And she said, yes, Baruch Hashem, we're okay. And 1 hour later, my mother was niftar. In that vein, in this week's parasha, in Toledot, Perek Chaf Zayin, Pasuk Aleph, it says, Vatichena einav mirot. The Oznaim LaTorah states that after Hashem created the world, the Malachim did not know what they could say to Hashem to improve on his masterpiece. However, our Avot, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, did ask for 3 things. Avram asked for Zikna. He asked to be old age. Yitzchak asked for Yisurim, trials and tribulations during this lifetime. And Yaakov asked for Choli. Yaakov was the first person, Hinei Avicha Choleh, that was sick. And he asked to be sick. If you think about it, in our world nowadays, of me and everything's me, who in their right mind would ask for these 3 things? However, Abraham, with old age, realized that even though people required physical sustenance, they also required spiritual sustenance as well. And he realized all of the lost opportunities that he had had and wished to correct it with a longer period of time in his life. Yitzchak suffered Vatichena einav mirot with his eyes so that he would not have to suffer in Olam Haba. Yaakov, who was into chinuch for his children, and especially his grandchildren, Ephraim and Menashe, requested to become sick so that he would have enough time to continue teaching his children and grandchildren and give a tzav to them before he died. My mother also accomplished these 3 things. She lived to the age of 90. And as she became older, she realized more and more the need for spiritual replenishment. Unfortunately, in the final years, Dementia took much of that away from her. She also suffered terrible tragedy in her life. When my sister, Aviva Zal, died 8 years ago, she never quite recovered, and many times she spoke to Debbie and I of wishing to join her. I can only hope that she's now at peace with herself. She also suffered the holy of being ill, especially towards the end, but did have moments when you could speak to her. And she loved having her grandchildren come and visit or call on the telephone before Shabbat or Yom Tov. I spoke with her the day before she died to tell her of our son's Naftali's engagement. And though she was unable to speak, her helper told me that she was smiling and nodding her head. I do need to thank several people. First of all, her amazing helpers who kept her company and healthy, always giving her respect and calling her Doc. She wouldn't answer unless you called her Doc. And they did. I want to thank every one of you who came tonight, late at night, a little chilly, to schlep, and I do thank you for coming. I need to thank my sister, who on a moment's notice would come flying in from New York to check on my parents, even for one day that turns into 12 days. No hesitation, no complaints. I need to thank my brother, who would come with his family for Shabbat, so that they could have a festive meal together and enjoy together, and for having boots on the ground in order to help in the day-to-day caring of them. I especially need to thank my wife, Debbie, who for the last 5 to 6 months has not had a full night's sleep, secondary to calls coming in throughout the night from my father, from the Shabbos yet, when the Shabbos, from the helpers, from the doctors and the nurses, and she's been by my side every step of the way. A true Eshet Chayil to me. Most of all, I need to thank my mother for having taught me to try and have good midot, and to try and always help others who may not be as fortunate as ourselves. I ask of you, Ma Mechila, for anything that I may have done or said over the years, especially as your illness took hold of you. I knew that it was only the illness speaking. We have always loved you. May you be a Meditz Yosher for us and our children and grandchildren, all of Am Yisrael. Tehei nishmatat tzura b'tzura ha'chayim.
Safta, you know how difficult it is for me to say goodbyes. But Hashem has decided that our time together is over. The last time we were able to spend time together, Evelyn and I had come into Chicago for a visit with Alicia and Shom. We had the honor of celebrating Shom's first birthday with you. It was such a special treat, and it brought me back to when we used to celebrate our own birthdays together with you. Whether it was my 5th birthday, and you and Saba came and enjoyed my birthday celebration from the side, or when it was my 10th birthday and we went out to pizza at Slice of Life. You always were there celebrating with me. You even remembered to call once we had made Aliyah, and I would have to call you back on my U.S. number because the call would be too expensive. I cherished every birthday with you. Growing up, we would spend Shabbatot and Chagim together, and I always waited my turn to come spend Shabbat alone with you and Saba. I enjoyed getting dressed with you on Shabbat morning and watching you put on your fancy costume jewelry and your beautiful hats. When we got to shul, we would first go to Saba's study to get your siddur and your belongings, and then we'd walk into the minyan together, first row, front and center, making sure I followed and davened myself. After minyan, we would socialize with all of your friends. But you always made sure to introduce me. As we waited for Saba to finish and come out, I always found myself peeking through the gate of the shop, and you would tell me we would come back during the week and pick something out. On vacation days, we used to come and spend time at your house. I fondly remember going out to your garden and picking cucumbers and cherry tomatoes with you, spending time at Lincolnwood Town Center and shopping in the stores. You always made sure I came home with something nice. Before we left the house, you always asked me what I would like to eat, and you always used to say, just keep a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in your bag, it never goes bad. I remember our last goodbyes when we made Aliyah, how difficult it was, and for me to grasp that I would no longer see you on a regular basis. Your Aliyah with Saba in 2017 was such a special treat to us. I loved having you so close by. The past few years have been difficult, especially this past year, as you have not been feeling yourself and you are unable to speak regularly. I want you to know how much I love you, and I will always cherish and remember our times together. Now it is time for me to say goodbye, and I will miss you very much. I know you'll be watching down over us, and I know I'll be looking up and thinking about you all the time. I love you.
Those of you who know me, I usually don't do speaking publicly, but here I am. Let me start by telling you a story. You see, over the past couple years, I spent many times visiting Chicago, and during those times, Mom and I would spend time talking, and I would ask her to tell me stories. So tonight I wanted to share my story. Once upon a time, there was a young girl who married into a family. As all families are, this one was different than her own. The wife of the family was a strong, determined woman who was career-minded, but also very inviting to others, especially towards this young girl. Within no time, the young girl felt a part of the new family. She felt so comfortable that the wife became her second mother. The young girl began to call her mom, even though she was her mother-in-law. From time to time, the mother expressed her opinions, thoughts, and suggestions. The young girl would often roll her eyes at those suggestions and only occasionally would listen to them and take the ideas and make it her own. Years passed, and the mother aged. The young girl was no longer young, but in fact had daughters-in-law of her own. She followed as her mother-in-law did and offered advice and opinions. Sometimes it was accepted and other times not. But most importantly, she only wanted to befriend her daughter-in-laws and make them feel part of the family as her mother-in-law did to her. Now our story is coming to an end. Mom, I must thank you publicly for being that amazing mother-in-law. There were many times that I brushed your opinions aside, and I'm sorry for that. But over the years, you always treated me like your own. You made me feel loved, respected, and cared for in the most simplest and modest ways. You were a wonderful role model. I will try to continue to emulate your actions. I love you very much, and I will always miss you.
פרק ט"ז בתהילים. מכתוב לדוד שומרי ניאל כי חוסיסי בוך. אומר תארינה לנהר בתוי נושאים בלולכו. לקדוי כמה שבו רצינו ועדירי כל חלק טיבום. עיר בו יחוי תמחם אור בעלסך נסכם מנדו ועלצריך וישמע ספוסוי. עדו אינוי בנאס חלקי בחוי סייתו תמיר גרולי. חבולים נפלו לי בנימים אף נחלה שופרו אלוהי. עבורו רסני אשר יוצון יפלי לא יסיסרוני חיליו יסוי. שיביסי עד אינו נגדי תמיד כי ממני בא למועד. לא חן סומך לבי והגל כבוידיה בסור ישכן לו בטח. כי לא יסער זו עם נפשי לשאול וסיתן חסית חולי רוי שוחס. תודי עיני אוי רך חיים צועב אז מוחי זה ספונכו. נעימוי וימינכו נצח.
להתקדש מרבה.
אמן.
ילמה דברה חיותך ימיך מלכותך. וחי יכול ובמחול וחי דוחובי ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קורא וברו אמן.
אמן יקרא בו ברוח ונותן היום. יתברך וישתבח ויתברך ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמך לקודשה בריחו. ולעם יתבוא ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה
דמירון בעלמה ואמרו אמן.
אמן.
אש נאמר רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
אמן.
עושה שלום ירומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
אמן. נשמור את זה, אתה אומר עוד מספר פעמים באמצע הדרך. יכולים ללכת, אין בעיה. אחרי אמא אפשר, לפני אבא לא. יכול לשים בו יד?
מצוין.
נו, היי בוא. הפח נשבור ואנחנו נותנו. ואילו אלוהינו עלינו עשה ידינו קוננו עלינו עשה ידינו קוננו. הישב בסייסר אליום תשע דייס לנו נאמר לעדיני מחסין צורה עושה להבטח בוי. כי יצלחו מפח יקוש נבר הבוית בעברוסי יוסר לא חסדק נופו ותחסד צינו ושכרה מיתוי. לא יסירו מפחד לא למחץ יופים ומדבר באפלה לא כתוב שצוראים. איפה אין לצדך אלו ובואו ממינך הולך לא יגרוש רק בעינך תביט. ושלמס השם תראה כי אתה עדיני מחסי אלין שמתו ממינך. לא יסעונה אליך רוב ונגע לא יקרא ועליך כי מלוך וצווה לך לשמורך בכל דרוכך. עד כפיים יסעונך פן תגוי באבן רעין. מאין בוזם תבשרך ואנתו ילך למקום אפורים ובשי לאור. ולפני מיעטו עשיתי תן דין וחשבון לפני מלך מלכי המלוכים הקדוש ברוך הוא.
עולמי עולמיה יפרח וישתבח ויפרח ויצומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמך וקודשה בריחו וילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. אש נאמר רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום ירומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל.
אמן. אש חיים נמצא ברחוק מפניני מיכו. בוטח בו לב בעלו ושלו לא יחסור כמו לעשות טוב ולא יראו כל מי רעהו. דור של צמר ופשטין נתן וחפץ כפהו. אוי סכני אוי סייחר ממרחק טוב ילחמו. ותקום בו עד לילה תיתן טרף לבייסו וחוק לנער יסעו. זו במוסדה ותיקוחם מפרי חפרנות אור קורם. חוג רוב עוז מוסנר וטעם עזרו יסעו. טעם מוקיטו סחר לא יכבה בלילה נערו. כדר שלך בקשר וחפר אותו מחופו הולך. כפה פורסו לא נבידר שלך לא אביון. לא יסירו לבייסו משעולי ככל בייסו לבוש שונים. ועבד עם עושסו לו. שיש וארגמון לבושו. לא ידע בשורים בעלו בשבטי עם זקני אורץ. סודינוס דבטים כוי בחגור נופסנו לכנעני. אוי זה הודור לבושו ותשחק ליום האחרון. פיו פוסחו בחוכמו וסוירס חסד על לשוינו. צויפי הליכוס בייסו ולחם רצוס לא צרחל. קומו בונו וישרו, בעלו ויללו. הבוי את בונו יסו סוחויל ועטוליס על כולונו. שקר אכן. הבל היפי שוי רסאינו היטי סלול. נו לו מפרי יודע ויעלו בשורים מעשהו. הקביו בן מעללה לא ימר יסתכל בשלישות דבורים מנתו בו לידי אווירו. דע מאין בוזו לנתו ילך ולפני מיעטו עשיתי תן דין לחשבוין. מאין בוזו ותיפוס רחון לנתו ילך למקיים אפורים ובסליאו. ולפני מיעטו עשיתי תן דין לחשבוין לפני מלך מלכי המלוכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. והוא רחום יכפר אבוין לא ישחיס. וירבו לו שיבה פוי ולא יאיר כל חמוסוי.
זהו ויקדש מרבה.
אמן.
ילמד יברח ירותך וימליך מלכותך. וחי יכול ובמכון ובחי דוחו בית ישראל בעגלה בזמן קרב אמרו אמן. לעולם עולמי עולמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויצומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמך דקודשה בריחו ועילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יש נאמר רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום ירומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
כל חמוסוי ורחום יכפר רבנו לא ישחיס ירבו לו שיפוי ולא יאיר כל חמוסוי. צא צמוד למצבה חיים, פתח צמוד למצבה. שלנו זה חשמונאים. פרק ט"ז בתהילים. מכתוב לדוד שומרני אל כי חוסי סיבוך. אמרת אדוני אדוני עוד תיבוסי בלולךו. לקדושים אשר באורץ עמו והדרי כל חפצי בום. עיר בעצלוי שמחם אור בלסך נזכה מדום בלסוי שמוי סמאס פוסוי. אדוני מנהל חלקי וחויסי אותו תומיר גורלי. חבולים נפלו לי בנימים אף נחלה שפרו לוי. אבורס העיני אשר ירצוני אף לילוי סיסרוני חליוסוי. שיביסי אדוני לגניתמיד כי ממני בלמוית. לכן שמח ליבי והגל כבדי הבשורי שכנו בטח. כי לא יסע זו עם נפשי לי שויל. וסיתן חסיתכו לרוי שוחס. תוי דעיני אוירח חיים. סוי בסמכו זסבונכו. נעמויס וימינכו נצח. קדיש.
יתקדר ויתקדש שמי רבה.
אמן.
וילמד יברח ירותה ומיך ואחותה. וחי יכון וביום יכון ובחי דחו בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קרב אמרו אמן. שמי רבה עול מיה יפרח וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומה ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמי דקודשה ברכו לילה מן כה ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה ואמירון בעלמה ואמרו אמן. השלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. הוא עושה שלום ממרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
מרת חווה ריבה בת יהודה לייב בשם החברה קדישה בשם המשפחה, הקרובים, הידידים והמלווים, אנו מבקשים ממך סליחה ומחילה. שם חס וחלילה פגענו בכבודך, הן בטהרה, בנשיאת המיטה, בתיקון הקבר, אנא סלחי לנו כי אין זו אלא שגגה. החבר קדישא נהגה איתך כי מנהגי ירושלים עיר הקודש. הנה מליצת יושר עבור משפחתך, קרובייך וידידייך, ועבור כל כלל ישראל בכל תפוצות ישראל. ויתן השם ובילה מוות לנצח, ומחה השם אלוקים דמעה מעל כל פנים, ובא לציון גואל במהרה בימינו אמן. לכי בשלום ותנוחי בשלום ותעמדי לגורלך לקץ הימים. כשנצא מחוץ לחלקה באזור הכביש, נעשה 2 שורות דברים לניחום אבלים לבן, את הבת מנחמים בלי שורה.
נצא משם לעשות שורה על הכביש הראשי, כדי לחזור למקום שבאנו. מי שרוצה לבוא לניחום אבלים בשורה זה שם. מה יריב? מיד אחרי
מקום מנחם אתכם בתוך שער ערבית ציון
ציבור זמן פלאפו ערבית.
This concludes the live stream. B'sorot tovot.